Hey, welcome to chapter 6. We go over selection, which sometimes is called branching. Maybe that's more of a back in the olden days kind of term, or just conditionals. And what conditionals and selection do is allows you to have some parts of code that only happen under certain conditions, and other parts of your code being run during other conditions. And you do this through a couple different methods, but the biggest way is through what is called an if statement. Um, there's also a special case, no pun intended, a special case if statement, which is called a switch statement or a case statement that we'll go over real quick too, but it's not as commonly used. It's usually if you have like a big long line of different conditions that you want to be able to take advantage of, or different values that. Anyways, we'll get to that here in a second. So, a relational operator is one that compares two values. Okay, and there's 6 main relational operators in JavaScript. There's the less than. So you're asking, is this number less than this other number, or this variable less than this other variable? Greater than, likewise, this just goes the other direction. Less than or equals to, or greater than equals to, and then you have that equals to or not equals to. The exclamation mark and the equals means not equals, and two equals together is comparing two things. Why two equal signs? Well, because when you have one equal sign, you're assigning a value to a variable. When you have two equal signs, you're comparing those two values. So they had to have a way to distinguish one from the other. So this, and they give you some examples, is if age is less or greater than or equal to 8, or if the variable call is equal to the variable last, things like that. So the way this statement is structured is you have the special keyword if, and then parentheses around the condition. So these are what are known as conditions. It's where there's a complete relational sentence or something that gets evaluated. Now conditionals or relational operators, conditionals always evaluate to one of two things, either true or false. Okay, is it true that I is less than 3? Is it true or false that x is greater than y? So everything in here has to be a condition of that evaluates to either true or false. And if it's true, it goes inside these two braces, and this is a block of code that only executes if this condition is true. If it's false, it completely skips it and moves on to the next line. Here you have some examples over here on the right. If balance is greater than 500, if it's true, then it goes inside this block of code. And then once it's done, it just continues on in the normal sequence. If it's false, it completely skips over that block of code and just goes to the outside of that block and continues on. Okay? Now, in addition to your if statement, you can have an else statement that comes right after it. And so the else statement happens if this condition is false. So if it's true, it goes inside this block. If it's false, then it comes out, it skips this block, it goes into the else block. So if x is greater than y, then do this. Else, do that. So only one or the other gets executed, not both. And so you can string them along like this. If, and then else comes immediately after the block for the if. And here's some examples that you can see. Now, say there's several different conditions that you want to test for, where it's not just one thing evaluates from either true or false. Maybe you say, if this is true, then do something, or if some other condition is true, then do something else. Else, do something finally that, if both of them are false. And that's this if else line of reasoning, okay? And that sounds funny, but if you look at it, it kind of makes sense. So if this condition is true, do this. Else, if this condition is true, do something else. Else, if both of those are false, then do this. All right, if either one of these are true, this does not happen. This only happens if both of these are false. Okay, so, and this doesn't happen if this is true, and this doesn't happen if this is true. So only one of these three sets of statements will be executed. And you can kind of go through the things here, and you can chain them along. Else if, so in this case, if cost is less than 100, the discount's this. Else, if cost is less than 250, do this. Else, if cost is less than 400, do a third thing. Else, everything else, the discount is 20%. So anything above 400. And so you can kind of chain these along, and these can be as long as you want. And but just remember, only one of these happens. So if cost is less than 100, it's not even going to try the rest of these because cost was already, it already went into this block of code. Then it skips it off to the end. Only if this is false does it move on to the next one. And only if both of these are false, then it'll try the third one. And so you'll notice cost is less than 250, but say you have a cost of $50. Well, cost of $50 is less than 100. It's also less than 250. It's also less than 400. So which one does it go in? Well, it goes in the one it comes to first. Cost is less than 100. It is. Discount 0.10, and then it skips all the rest because it only does one of these. When you have a list of if, else, if, else, if, else, if, else, it only picks the one, and it picks the first one that it qualifies for. The first one that is true for the value, for the condition. And you can kind of go through here. It gives you several examples. So this just talks more about what I was just relating to. So the switch statement is just a more compact way of doing excessive if else, if else, if else, if else, if you're only testing on one variable. So the switch statement says, okay, here's the variable. Let's say it's cost. Case, so each condition is under a case. If it and it has to be an equals case. So if cost is equal to 100, do this. And this would be a 200 or a 300. So it's a choice of a variable, and then it says, okay, in this case, this variable is, 10. And if this variable is 10, then do some stuff. And then break is the thing that breaks it out of the conditions and the checks. It's kind of a very special case. Again, no pun intended. To use a switch statement. Most people don't think to use them until after they've already written their else if statements. Then they thought, oh, wait, a case statement would have totally worked out nicer here. Or a switch statement. I have heard it called both things, and here it's called switch. And so then they'll go back and change it to the switch statement. But it's kind of a special situation where, and here's a example. So you have a class standing variable, and if class standing is equal to F, then you set your register date to November 23rd. If your class standing is S, so I guess it's freshman, sophomore, your registration date is something else. Class standing is J, N, and only one of these will happen, or default is you don't have a class standing. This is everything else. And so this is kind of the catch-all at the end. It's like the else at the very end. So it's like that. You can look into it a little bit closer if you're confused, or you can even ask me. So here's some examples. Here's an example of how to check to see if there are if a number is even or odd. And the easiest way to do this, and this pops up several times in this class, and so it's really important to understand it, even if it's not the only way to necessarily solve one of the computer assignments. There's one of them where you have to list all the even numbers or something like that. Once we get into repetition, there are several different ways. One way uses this method, and then there are other ways to do it. But it's good to understand it, even if there were other ways to understand it. So I don't know if you remember seeing in the test, but there's a operator in math called the modulus. And the modulus is just a division. So it does a division on two numbers, and then it returns just the remainder of the division. So say you have 21 and you're dividing it by 4. 4 goes in 21 evenly 5 times, but there's the number 1 left over from 20 to 21. So a modulus would return just the 1. And so in order to figure out whether a number is even or odd, is to use this modulus and divide it by 2, because by definition an even number is one that divides evenly by 2 with no remainder. And so if you do the modulus by 2 and it equals 0, that means there's no remainder, then the number is even. If it equals to 1, then the number is odd. So here's an if statement example. Check to see the number that was input if it's even or odd. So the user inputs a number, it parses it into an integer, and then it checks number modulus 2 is equal to 0. That means there's no remainder. And it says, okay, well then the number is even. Else, the number is odd. And then outputs it to the user. Likewise, you can do the same thing, just the other direction. If it's equal to 1, if the remainder is 1, then you know it's odd and not even. Let's see. So this is more examples of the same. Here's an example for using the quadratic formula. So nested if statements. So you can actually put if statements inside of if statements. So in this example, let's just say, okay, if sales are less than 300, then I just want my rate to be 0, period. Every sale under 300, I want the rate to be 0. Otherwise, so if the sales are greater than or equal to 300, then I also want to check to see if the sales are less than 600, and then the rate becomes 0.02. Else, and then I want to also check to see if there's less than 1,000. So you can nest these, they call it nesting. It's putting an if statement inside of an if statement inside of an if statement. Pretty soon it's an if statements all the way down, I guess. But in order to do multiple conditions at the same time. So you check one condition, and if it's true or false, then you check another condition to inside of that code block. And you have to be really careful about where these else statements, which ones that they belong to. So this else statement belongs to this guy, but this else statement belongs to this guy, and this one belongs to this guy. So you don't want to say, oh, this is false, and so I'm going to else out down to here. No, you else down to here. And that's why it's good. It's nice to line them up like this instead of having it all together, because it's easier to see which statements go together. So those two go together, these go together, and these blocks go together like that. More examples of if, else ifs. See this one checks to see what the age is, and then inside you have another if statement that checks the games attended. So if you're under 18 and If games attended is less than 6, then you have a different price. Else if games attended is less than 11, else whatever. So this is an example of nested if statements using different conditions. This one, the first one's based off age, but the next one's based off of games attended. See, is there anything else that I missed in here? Lots of review questions, lots of examples that you can go through. The 6 common are double equals, less than or equal to, which is not equals, less than equal to, greater than equal to. And switch statements are special cases where you can replace if, else, if statements, assuming that you're only worried about whether something is equal to a certain value. I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you have a good week.